Blood Rose, the Midnight Nurse. In Mexico City, they say some rose bushes bloom redder than others, bushes nourished by blood and secrets. My grandmother Elena tended such a bush, and this is the story of the night that changed her life forever. I never intended to share this tale. My grandmother would have preferred it remain buried like so many things in our family. But some stories demand to be told. Some burdens are too heavy to carry alone. For Elena's sake, I've changed certain names, but the truth, the horrifying, inexplicable truth, remains intact. Elena was born and raised in the Veralvillo neighborhood of Mexico City in the late 1950s. It wasn't the safest district even then, narrow streets winding between low buildings, shadows pooling in corners where sunlight never quite reached. But it was home, and Elena knew every inch of it. After completing technical nursing school with honors, she secured a position at a local clinic. 6 days a week, she would work there from dawn until late afternoon. But her real work began after sunset. That's when Elena would travel through the neighborhood with her worn medical bag filled with bandages, saline solution, and syringes. For the residents of Veralvillo, she was Madre Elena, the only person with medical knowledge many of them would ever encounter, a healing presence who came when called day or night. There's always someone knocking at night, she often told me. Sometimes it's a kitchen knife cut, sometimes a feverish child, but sometimes it's something else entirely. Elena lived in a small house with her family. Her husband worked as a mechanic, and they had 3 teenage children. Each night she would place her medical bag beside her bed, ready for emergency calls. She knew how her neighborhood transformed after dark. She understood which streets belonged to which gangs, which territories were disputed, which areas to avoid after sundown. Her ritual never varied. When the knock came, Elena would slip on her white coat, fasten the small silver crucifix around her neck, both protection and identification. In a dangerous district like Veralvillo, that white coat was an invisible shield, a symbol of neutrality between warring factions. "A knock on your door in the dead of night never brings good news," she would say. But there was one night, one terrible blood-soaked night in the summer of 1978, when that knock changed everything. That July had been punishingly hot, the city suffocating under a record-breaking heat wave. The air hung thick and motionless, the concrete streets radiating heat even after midnight. Elena had spent a grueling day at the clinic treating heat stroke and dehydration cases. When she finally returned home, she collapsed into bed, immediately falling into a deep, exhausted sleep. Around 2 a.m., the knocking began. Not the usual tentative rapping of knuckles on wood, but the persistent, urgent sound of metal against the door, a coin being scraped across the surface, creating a sound that penetrated every corner of the house. "Senora Elena, please open the door," a girl's voice called from outside. Elena's eyes snapped open, instantly alert. In 15 years of night calls, she had developed an intuition about which ones carried real urgency. This was one of them. She slipped on her coat over her nightdress and hurried to the door. Standing on her doorstep was a girl no older than 12, her face unnaturally pale in the dim streetlight, clothes smudged with dirt, hair disheveled as if she'd been running. But it was the girl's eyes that sent a chill through Elena's body, wide with genuine terror, filled with something beyond ordinary fear. "My uncle is badly hurt. You have to help him," the girl said, her voice trembling. "Please hurry, he's dying." Elena glanced at the clock, considering whether to wake her husband to accompany her. But seeing the panic on the child's face, she knew there was no time to lose. She grabbed her medical bag and followed the girl into the night. "Where do you live?" Elena asked as they stepped into the deserted street. 12 blocks away," the girl replied, walking so quickly she was almost running. "Please hurry. They told me to find you as fast as possible." As they traversed the dark streets, Elena felt something wasn't right. The girl was too quiet, too strange. Elena tried asking about her uncle's condition, but the child only shook her head or offered vague responses. "He's hurt. They told me not to say anything else." Occasionally the girl would turn back to look at Elena, and in the weak glow of the street lamps her eyes seemed to have no whites, just dark pools that reflected nothing. Elena told herself it was just a trick of the light, her mind playing tricks after being awakened so abruptly. When they arrived, Elena found herself standing before an old house with boarded windows. The girl knocked in a particular rhythm, and the door opened just enough for them to slip inside. "She's here," the girl announced to someone in the shadows, then vanished into the darkness of the house. The smell hit Elena immediately, the metallic tang of blood gunpowder and the sharp scent of tequila. The room was dimly lit by a single naked bulb hanging from the ceiling. Beneath this feeble light lay a man on the floor. He wore a white shirt now soaked crimson from 2 wounds, one in his chest, the other in his abdomen, 2 bullet holes slowly leaking blood forming a dark pool on the cement floor. His face was contorted in pain, but his eyes remained strangely alert, almost feverishly bright. "This is Senora Elena," someone said from a dark corner of the room. "She'll help you, Mateo." As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, Elena realized there were at least 5 men in the room, all armed, pistols tucked into waistbands, knives glinting in the dim light. In the far corner, 2 men were restraining another who was struggling and shouting not in pain, but in fury. "Let me go. I'll kill every last one of them." Elena knelt beside the wounded man, opened her medical kit, and began examining the injuries. These were serious wounds. The bullets had pierced a lung and possibly damaged the liver. He needed immediate surgery. "He needs to go to a hospital," she said firmly. "I can't treat these wounds here." The door behind her slammed shut. A tall man with a scarred face stepped forward, gripping her shoulder. "Nobody's going anywhere," he said, his voice low and rough. "You don't understand the situation. Mateo can't go to a hospital. They're looking for him." "Who's looking for him?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "The police. And people worse than police." Elena understood she was in the middle of a gang conflict. But as a nurse, she couldn't refuse to help. "I need more supplies," she said. "These wounds require more than what I have in my bag. I need antiseptic suturing needles, painkillers." "Rosita," the man called, and the girl who had brought Elena appeared from the shadows. "Go to La Raza Hospital. Find what she needs." The girl nodded, taking a hastily written list and a wad of cash before disappearing into the night. Elena began doing what she could with her limited supplies, trying to staunch the bleeding, cleaning around the wounds. While working, she listened to the conversation coming from the kitchen. They were discussing a war with another gang, about violated territory, about betrayal. A name was mentioned repeatedly, El Serpiente the Snake. They said he had declared war, and tonight there would be blood. Suddenly 3 men emerged from the back room carrying heavy weapons rifles wrapped in cloth and what looked like a submachine gun. Not the weapons of petty criminals. This was an organized gang. Elena felt cold sweat running down her spine. She had unwittingly stepped into a war zone. "Work faster," one of them told her. "We don't have much time." With each passing minute, Mateo's condition deteriorated. His breathing grew more labored, his pulse more irregular. Every few minutes, Elena had to slap his face to keep him conscious. "Don't sleep," she urged. "Look at me. Focus on my voice." Half an hour passed, and Rosita hadn't returned. Elena began to worry. The girl could have run into trouble, or worse, gone to the police. And then they heard at cars, not one but several engines roaring, then suddenly cutting off. Headlights swept through the cracks in the boarded windows, casting harsh beams into the room. "They're here," someone shouted. The woman, apparently Mateo's wife or girlfriend, pulled Elena backward away from the front door. Simultaneously, she dragged Mateo, trying to move him deeper into the house. Mateo groaned in pain, his wounds beginning to bleed again. Elena stood frozen, stunned. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Heavy footsteps outside, someone ordering the door to be kicked in. And then, boom! The deafening blast of a shotgun. The door exploded inward, wood splinters flying everywhere. Through the gun smoke, figures rushed in, at least 6 or 7 men, all armed. The light from flashlights and laser sights swept through the darkened room, creating an eerie, chaotic scene. "El Serpiente sends his regards," one of them shouted, and then hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from all directions, the sound of shattering glass, of bullets tearing through wood, screams and curses, blood sprayed across walls and floor. Elena pressed herself into a corner, trying to become invisible. In the strobe-like flashes from the muzzles, she saw faces distorted by hatred and fear. She witnessed a man shot in the head, another stabbed repeatedly. El Serpiente's crew had the advantage, and they showed no intention of leaving survivors. In the chaos, Mateo crawled toward Elena, eyes wide with desperation. "Help me," he whispered, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Please get me out of here." Elena's nursing instincts took over. She couldn't abandon a patient no matter who he was. With unexpected courage, she slung his arm over her shoulder and began moving toward the back door. Under the cover of the gunfight, no one noticed them. They slipped through the kitchen, where 2 bodies already lay on the floor. She felt Mateo trembling, perhaps from blood loss, perhaps from seeing his comrades dead. "Just a little further," she whispered. "Hold on." They made it through the back door, plunging into the darkness of the alley. The gunfire continued behind them, but each step took them farther from the massacre. Elena could feel her white coat becoming wet and sticky, Mateo's blood soaking through, transforming it to a deep crimson. "Where to?" Mateo asked, his voice weakening. "La Raza Hospital," Elena replied. "It's the only place that can save you." Mateo shook his head, causing him to cough blood. "No, not there. They're waiting for me there. Not to save me, but to kill me or lock me away forever." His voice grew fainter, more labored. Each word seemed to cost him precious strength. 12 blocks the journey back to Elena's home had never seemed so long. Each step was a battle. Mateo leaned heavily on her shoulder, his feet dragging on the ground. Every few meters they had to stop for him to catch his breath. Blood dripped behind them, leaving a dark trail on the pavement. The neighborhood had awakened at the sound of gunfire. Lights came on and houses' windows cracked open as residents peered outside. But when they saw Elena and the blood-soaked man, they quickly closed their doors, drew their curtains, and made the sign of the cross. No one wanted to be involved. "We're almost there," Elena said, trying to encourage both Mateo and herself. "Hold on." But Mateo was growing heavier, weaker with each step. His breathing became rapid, shallow, and irregular. He was dying, and Elena knew it. There was nothing she could do to stop the inevitable. "Tell Rosita," Mateo whispered, but never completed the sentence. His body went rigid, then completely limp. Strangely, though he had stopped breathing, Elena still felt a weight on her shoulder, still felt something clinging to her. As they turned the final corner, Elena's house came into view. The lights were on. Her family had awakened, probably worried about her absence. Elena mustered all her remaining strength to take those final steps. She knocked on the door with her foot, having no hands free. The door opened and her husband stood there, his face tense with worry. When he saw her, he let out a scream of horror, a scream that could have awakened the entire neighborhood. "Santa Maria!" he cried, stepping backward. Standing behind him were their children, and when they saw their mother, they too screamed in terror. Elena didn't understand. Why were they reacting this way? She looked down at herself, the white coat now red with blood, but that wasn't enough to cause such horror. And then she felt the weight on her shoulder diminish, sliding downward. She turned, thinking Mateo was slipping from her grasp, but there was no one there. Instead, what she had been carrying all the way home fell to the floor with a heavy thud. Mateo's head, eyes wide open in eternal terror, blood still seeping from the severed neck. Elena stared, unable to believe her eyes. She raised her hand to her shoulder where Mateo's head had been resting. There was no trace of a body, no blood marks where a body should have left them, only the marks of the head. The world spun around her, and Elena fainted, falling into her husband's arms. When she awoke, she was lying in bed, her family gathered around her. On their faces were expressions of fear and concern. "What happened?" she whispered. "Don't speak of it," her husband replied, his voice trembling. "Never speak of it again." But she needed to know. "The head. Where is it?" "We buried it," her eldest son said. "In the garden under the rose bush." Elena never told that story again, but the nightmare never left her. Each night in her dreams she would find herself walking dark streets carrying an inexplicable burden. And each morning she would look out into the garden where the rose bush grew taller, more beautiful than all the others, nourished by a bloody secret. Years later, when Elena's grandson, came to visit, my mother pulled me aside and whispered, "Next time we go to Grandma's house, look at the rose bush in the garden. Find the largest and most beautiful one. That's where the head is buried." I did as told, and the strange thing was the roses on that bush were a deep crimson, almost black, unlike any other roses. And if you look closely at the petals, sometimes you could see the shape of a face screaming. I don't know if that night happened exactly as my grandmother claimed, but I do know this: in Mexico there exists an ancient Aztec ritual called tzompantli, the skull rack where severed heads were displayed, the belief being that a severed head would never find rest. The soul becomes trapped between worlds, eternally searching for its lost body. And sometimes, when it cannot find its own body, the soul attaches itself to the person who carried it, an uninvited guest, an invisible companion. A few months after that fateful night, Rosita, the girl who had led my grandmother to the house, was found dead in an alley near La Raza Hospital. Her throat had been cut, her head nearly severed from her body. My grandmother never took night calls again. She abandoned nursing altogether and never went out after sunset. "The night belongs to the dead," she would say. "And once you've carried death on your shoulders, you never truly escape its weight." In Mexico City today, if you ever find yourself in the Vero Vio district and see an unusually vibrant rosebush growing in someone's garden, walk quickly past. Don't admire it too closely. Those roses bloom so red because they drink from something darker than water. And if a young girl knocks on your door in the dead of night, begging you to follow her to help someone injured, lock your door, make the sign of the cross, and pray she finds someone else to carry her burden. In cultures worldwide, there are stories of souls trapped by violent death. Have you ever heard a similar tale from your family or community? What secrets do the plants in your garden hide? Share in the comments below. Burned souls, the convent of fire. There's a small convent at the foot of the Popocatépetl volcano outside Mexico City where they perform an ancient ritual called Santa Ceniza Holy Ash. That's where my brother disappeared the night his car broke down on Calzada de las Bombas, and I'm the only one who knows the truth. Most accidents happen within 5 miles of home. That's what my brother Javier used to joke about. He was always like that, finding humor in the strangest facts. 5 years older than me, he was my model of confidence and street smarts. Since our parents died in a car accident 10 years ago, he had become the family's cornerstone, looking after me and eventually his own family. Javier worked as an IT engineer for a telecommunications company in Mexico City. It was a stable job with a good salary, comfortable enough for him to spend time with his small family, his wife Gabriela and their 2 children, Miguel and Lucia. They lived in a modest apartment in the Guapa district, not far from where we grew up. I lived just a few neighborhoods away, and we would meet regularly on weekends. He loved his blue Volkswagen Jetta. He had bought it with his first savings after starting work, and even though it was aging, he maintained it like a child. Every weekend he would wash it, check the engine, and keep it in perfect condition. "A good car is like a loyal friend," he often said. "Take care of it and it will never betray you." That fateful night I had just fallen asleep after an exhausting day. As a bartender at a downtown bar, I usually came home late and drained. The clock showed 1:20 a.m. when my phone rang. Seeing Javier's name, my heart raced. My brother never called at this hour unless it was an emergency. "Javi, what's wrong?" I asked, voice still drowsy. "Diego, I'm sorry for calling so late." His voice sounded tense. My car died on Calzada de las Bombas. The engine suddenly shut off, no lights, no signals. The steering wheel locked up. I barely managed to pull over. "Have you called roadside assistance?" I asked, already getting dressed. "Yes, they're on their way, but I don't want to be alone on the road at this hour. Could you—" "Say no more. I'll be there right away." I grabbed my car keys and drove to Calzada de las Bombas, a wide avenue cutting through the southern neighborhoods of Mexico City. At this hour, the streets were nearly deserted, with only the occasional taxi passing by, or a heavy truck making the pavement vibrate. The night was damp and cold, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones when you've just left a warm bed. A thin mist covered the streets, blurring the yellow glow from the street lamps. I drove slowly, eyes scanning the roadside for Javier's blue Jetta. When I arrived, I saw the tow truck was already there. Two men wearing reflective vests were walking around the Jetta, inspecting it with flashlights. I parked ahead and got out, puzzled not to see my brother anywhere. Normally, he would be standing beside the car waiting. The Jetta was parked close to the curb, its rear end jutting slightly into the road. What struck me immediately was that both the trunk and the driver's door were wide open, as if someone had left in a hurry. Inside the car, I saw Javier's phone lying on the floor by the driver's seat, its screen still illuminated. "Hello?" I called to the tow truck operators. "I'm the car owner's brother. Where is he?" They looked at me with confusion. "We just arrived. There was no one here." My heart beat faster. "He called me less than 30 minutes ago. He said he would wait here." At that moment, a man emerged from the shadows between two nearby high-rise buildings. He was about 60, thin, wearing an old jacket and a wool cap. He approached us cautiously. "Buenas noches," he greeted. "I'm Fernando, the security guard for the building across the street." He pointed toward a block of apartments, most windows dark with just a few scattered lights. "Have you seen my brother?" I asked urgently. "The man with this Jetta." Fernando nodded, his expression grave. "Yes, I saw him. It happened about 20 minutes ago. He was checking the engine when the accident occurred." I felt my legs weaken. "What accident?" Fernando pointed ahead where the avenue widened. "A motorcycle. The rider wasn't going too fast, but he wasn't wearing a helmet. Your brother stepped into the road without looking. They collided." I followed his gesture. About 20 meters ahead, a motorcycle lay on its side on the pavement, the handlebars twisted. Nearby was a dark stain on the road extending toward the sidewalk. "Did anyone call an ambulance?" I asked, feeling short of breath. Fernando shook his head. "No need. Your brother wasn't badly hurt, fortunately. The impact wasn't severe, but the motorcyclist wasn't wearing a helmet. He hit his head on the pavement." "Then where are they?" I asked, my voice almost a shout. "If no ambulance came, who took them away?" Fernando looked at me strangely, as if I was missing something obvious. "Didn't you see them, the nuns?" "Nuns," I repeated, feeling like I'd fallen into a bizarre dream. "Yes, the nuns. They passed by right after the accident, 3 or 4 of them. They helped your brother and the motorcyclist took them away." The two tow truck operators exchanged uncomfortable glances, as if they'd heard enough and wanted to complete their job as quickly as possible. "We need to decide about the car," one of them said. "Should we tow it?" I waved them away. "No, leave it here. I need to find my brother first." They nodded, clearly eager to withdraw from this strange situation. I turned back to Fernando. "Did you see which way they went, the nuns?" Fernando shook his head. I had to return to my post, but they went that way. He pointed north along the avenue, then turned back toward the darkness, leaving me with more questions than answers. I retrieved Javier's phone from the floor of the car, checking recent calls. The last one was to me 38 minutes earlier. No sign of any calls to emergency services or hospitals. I got in my car and began driving slowly along the avenue, eyes scanning for any hospital, clinic, or even church, anywhere the nuns might have taken my brother. But Calzada de las Bombas at 2 a.m. was a different world. Sidewalks, deserted shops, tightly shuttered, the neon signs of closed bars giving off a dying glow in the distance. No sign of my brother the motorcyclist or any nuns. After 2 hours of fruitless searching, I had to call Gabriela, Javier's wife. She was awake, worried because her husband hadn't come home. When I related what Fernando had told me, she fell silent for a long moment. "Accident, nuns," her voice trembled. "Diego, this makes no sense." "I know," I said, "but that's all I know. He wasn't at the scene, the car was open, and the security guard said nuns took him away after an accident." "Have you checked hospitals?" "All hospitals in the area. No one registered under his name." A cold sensation spread through my chest. My brother had vanished, and the only story I had about nuns appearing in the middle of the night on a deserted avenue sounded like a bad joke. We reported the disappearance to the police, but their response was disappointing. "Adults have the right to disappear if they want," an officer said dismissively. "Wait 48 hours and see if he returns." But Javier wasn't someone who would abandon his family without explanation. He was the one who always called when he'd be late, who never missed family dinner, who took his children to school every morning. Disappearing wasn't something he would do. The days that followed passed in anxiety and desperation. We posted flyers with Javier's picture all over the city, contacted every hospital and morgue in Mexico City. I returned to Calzada de las Bombas multiple times looking for witnesses other than Fernando, but no one admitted to having seen the accident. I checked every security camera in the area, but ironically the Jetta had stopped in a blind spot, a section of road not covered by any camera. As if someone had calculated this. Weeks turned to months and months to years. No trace of Javier, no signal, no evidence. Just an emptiness and unanswered questions. The official investigation gradually closed due to lack of progress. But I couldn't forget what I'd seen at the accident site, Javier's open car, the fallen motorcycle, the bloodstain on the pavement, and the security guard's strange words about nuns appearing in the middle of the night. Miguel, Javier's eldest son, then 12 years old, was particularly affected. He began collecting information about his father's disappearance, setting up a bulletin board in his bedroom with maps, photos, and notes. He became obsessed with discovering the truth. A year after the disappearance, Miguel called me, his voice quivering with excitement. "Uncle Diego, I found something in Dad's car." I drove to Gabriela's apartment immediately. Miguel was waiting at the door holding a small card, an estampita, the kind of holy card common in Mexico. The front showed an image of the Virgin Mary. The back had a prayer printed in tiny letters and the name of a convent, Convento de Santa Inés de la Ceniza Amecameca. "I found it in Dad's glove compartment," Miguel explained. "It was stuck under the logbook. I've been researching this convent online. It's real, Uncle Diego. Amecameca, a small town nestled at the foot of the Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl volcanoes, about an hour's drive southeast of Mexico City. I had never heard Javier mention this place, nor did I know of any connection he might have had with a convent." "Did your father ever talk about this place?" I asked. Miguel shook his head. "Never. But don't you remember the nuns? The guard said it was nuns who took Dad away." I looked at the card, feeling goosebumps rise all over my body. This could be a coincidence, or it could be the first real clue about what had happened to Javier. "Don't tell your mother," Miguel said. "Not yet. I don't want to give her false hope." I nodded in agreement. "We'll investigate first." The next day, Saturday, Miguel and I set out for Amecameca. As we left the city, the landscape changed dramatically from skyscrapers and busy streets to green fields and small villages. In the distance, the two volcanoes rose majestically against the blue sky, their peaks covered with gleaming white snow. "Dad loved the mountains," Miguel said softly. "He always wanted to take us camping here." Amecameca was a picturesque small town with a central plaza, an old church, and cobblestone streets. We stopped to ask directions to the Santa Inés convent. A few locals pointed us toward a winding road leading out of town, higher up the mountainside. "The sisters there keep to themselves," an elderly woman said, lowering her voice. They don't receive many visitors. The convent stood isolated, surrounded by high stone walls. The main gate was made of heavy wood, looking as if it had been there for centuries. A small bell hung beside the gate, and I pulled the cord, creating an echoing sound from within. After several minutes of waiting, a face appeared at a small window in the gate, an elderly nun with a gaunt face and sharp eyes. "May I help you?" she asked in a monotone voice. "Hello," I said. "I'm looking for information about my brother Javier Mendoza. He disappeared a year ago." "We know no man named Javier Mendoza," she interrupted, her tone definitive. "But we have reason to believe he might have been brought here," I said, showing the estampita. "We found this in his car." The nun looked at the card without expression. "We distribute thousands of these to pilgrims. It means nothing." I felt disappointment rising. "I understand. But could we come inside to talk more? We've come a long way." The nun was silent for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "You may enter the outer courtyard. I'll call the Mother Superior." The gate opened, and we stepped into a small courtyard with a fountain in the center and stone benches around it. The scent of incense and wax candles wafted from a nearby chapel. The place was so quiet you could hear birds singing in the ancient trees surrounding it. The Mother Superior appeared after a few minutes, a tall, thin woman with a serene face. She greeted us with politeness but distance, listening to our story about Javier's disappearance and the mysterious nuns on Calzada de las Bombas. "I'm very sorry about your brother," she said when I finished, "but I can assure you that our sisters do not travel in the city at night. We adhere strictly to the convent schedule." "Do you know of any other order of nuns who might have been there?" I asked. "No order allows sisters to travel at that hour," she replied. "Perhaps the security guard was mistaken." The conversation seemed to be reaching a dead end, and I felt we were wasting our time. But as we prepared to leave, Miguel suddenly exclaimed and pointed to a corridor. "Uncle Diego, look there." I followed his gaze and saw a young nun passing by carrying a tray with candles and flowers. But it wasn't the nun that excited Miguel. It was what was on the corridor wall, a series of small items displayed in glass cases similar to saintly relics. "Can we see those?" Miguel asked the Mother Superior. She looked at us with discomfort. "Those are altars to the martyred saints. Of course you may observe, but please don't touch." We walked along the corridor, Miguel running ahead, checking each glass case. Most contained small objects, a piece of cloth, an old prayer book, a small crucifix. But as we moved deeper into the corridor, Miguel suddenly froze before one glass case. "Uncle Diego," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's Dad's." I approached and felt my blood freeze in my veins. Inside the glass case was a leather bracelet, the bracelet I had given Javier for his 30th birthday, with his name engraved on the inside. Next to it was a small drawing done in black ink on parchment, a man surrounded by flames, his face contorted in pain. That face, though drawn in a classical style, had the unmistakable features of Javier. "What is this?" I asked the Mother Superior, trying to control my anger. "Why is my brother's property here? And what is this drawing?" The Mother Superior showed no surprise or confusion. She simply made the sign of the cross and said quietly, "The martyred saints." "This is not a saint," Miguel said, his voice shaking. "This is my father, and this is his bracelet. I recognize it." "You should leave now," the Mother Superior said, her voice becoming harder. "We have hosted you long enough." Two other nuns appeared as if from nowhere, blocking both ends of the corridor. Miguel began to cry, and I felt a cold fear spreading throughout my body. "We will call the police," I said, trying to sound brave. "This is evidence that my brother was here." "You may do what you feel necessary," the Mother Superior said, unshaken. "But there is no evidence here, just an ordinary bracelet and a religious drawing." We left the convent feeling defeated and confused. Miguel was silent the entire journey back, only occasionally wiping away tears. I felt angry and powerless. We had found something, a real clue, but it led to more questions than answers. Back in Mexico City, I decided to report to the police, but they didn't take our findings seriously. A similar bracelet is not evidence, they said, and the drawing could be anyone. We can't get a search warrant based on that. With no other options, I decided to return to the convent alone, hoping to find more evidence. Over the next 2 months, I went to Amecameca 3 times each time, trying to talk with other nuns or locals. But the entire town seemed to maintain silence. No one knew or was willing to tell what happened behind those convent walls. On my final trip, I arrived at dawn and hid myself in the woods near the convent, observing with binoculars. Most of the time, there was nothing noteworthy: nuns walking around, working in the garden, praying. But as dusk fell, I witnessed a scene that chilled me to the bone. In the rear courtyard of the convent, a large fire was lit. The nuns stood in a circle around it, holding candles, murmuring prayers. Thick black smoke rose into the night sky, and in the flickering firelight, I saw one of them throw something into the flames, something that looked like a portrait or a drawing. I never found Javier. No other clues, no evidence strong enough to convince the police. The official investigation gradually closed due to lack of progress, but I couldn't forget what I had seen at the convent: my brother's bracelet, the drawing of him burning in flames, and the mysterious ritual with the fire in the back courtyard. Questions still haunted me every day. Why did the nuns have Javier's belongings? What did the drawing mean? And most importantly, what had happened to my brother on that fateful night? Miguel, now nearly 18, never gave up. He researched the history of the Santa Ynez convent and discovered disturbing details. The convent was founded in the 17th century by a group of Spanish nuns who came to Mexico to purify those considered possessed. According to local legend, the nuns had the ability to see damned souls and save them through purification by fire. One night, 6 years after Javier's disappearance, I received a call from Miguel at midnight. "Uncle Diego, I've been researching the Santa Ynez ritual, Holy Ash," he said, his voice excited. "It's an ancient ceremony banned by the Catholic Church centuries ago. They believe certain souls are trapped between this world and the next and can only be released through sacred fire. Miguel, hear me out," he said urgently. "According to legend, people who are seriously injured but not dead people at the threshold of death can see both worlds. The nuns of Santa Ynez believe these souls are bridges to the afterlife, and through them the nuns can communicate with the dead." "What are you saying?" "Don't you see, Dad was in an accident, but he wasn't badly hurt. The motorcyclist was the one who was seriously injured. The nuns took them not to save them, but to use them in their ritual." I felt a chill run down my spine. "This is just legend, Miguel. We have no proof." "Dad's bracelet and the drawing of him burning are proof," he almost shouted. "And there's more. I've been researching disappearances in the area around Amecameca. In the past 50 years, there have been at least 17 cases, all men, all involving accidents, and all never found." I didn't know what to say. Miguel's theory sounded like a horror story, but strangely it also made a terrifying kind of sense. It explained why the nuns appeared at the accident scene, why they took Javier's belongings, and why we saw the drawing of him burning. "I'm going back there," Miguel said. "I need to know the truth." "No," I said, my voice firm. "Enough, Miguel. We can't lose anyone else." He was silent for a moment, then spoke in an odd tone. "It may be too late, Uncle Diego. I received an estampida last week, identical to the one we found in Dad's car. It was sent to my address, no accompanying letter, no sender." My heart nearly stopped. "Miguel, listen to me. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming right now." I drove to Miguel's apartment as fast as possible, breaking every speed limit. But when I arrived, he was already gone. On his bed was an open notebook with detailed notes about the Santa Ynez ritual and a map marked with the route to the convent. I drove to Amecameca in desperation, hoping to catch Miguel before he reached the convent. But when I arrived in town, the sky above the mountain was glowing with an orange-red light. From a distance, I saw black smoke rising from the direction of the convent. When I arrived, the convent was engulfed in flames. Local fire trucks were trying to extinguish the fire, but the blaze was too large, too powerful. No one could enter the building. A local police officer told me that witnesses had seen a young man break into the convent about an hour before the fire started. No one knew what had happened inside, but the fire began in the chapel area where the martyred saints were worshipped. I never found Miguel's body, nor did I ever find any trace of the nuns. When the ruins cooled, investigators found only ashes and bones, too many to determine exactly how many people had died in the fire. Today, the ruins of the Santa Ynez convent still stand abandoned on the mountainside. Locals avoid the place, saying that on dark nights one can hear prayers and see robed figures moving among the charred walls. And sometimes drivers on Calzada de las Bombas in the late hours report seeing nuns walking along the sidewalk, stopping beside broken-down cars, inviting drivers to come with them to a place of safety. Today, I no longer drive after midnight. And when I hear the sound of a car engine dying in the dark, I always draw my curtains and make the sign of the cross. Because I know not all who wear white robes come to help. Some come to harvest. I never found definitive answers about the fate of Javier and Miguel, but sometimes in dreams I see them standing amid flames, faces serene, waving to me. And when I wake, I always find a trace of ash on my pillow, as if someone had touched me in the night with charred fingers. Yesterday I found an estampita under my apartment door, the Virgin Mary on the front, and the name of the convent on the back. But the convent hasn't existed for over a decade. Tonight I hear knocking at my door. Many cultures have stories about gateways between this world and the next. Have you ever heard strange knocking in the dead of night? Have you ever felt something watching you from the shadows? Share your experience in the comments below. The gatekeeper don't open the blue door. There's an ancient Aztec ritual called the gatekeeper, where a soul is bound to guard the boundary between the living and the dead. I know this is real because I've become one of them, and it all began when my dog Lobo heard knocking at midnight. I've always believed dogs possess a sixth sense. All those stories about animals sensing danger before humans, about them seeing things we cannot, I believe them all. And after what happened, I believe them even more. My dog Lobo, a local mixed breed with sleek black fur, saved my life. Or perhaps, as my nightmares still remind me, he unwittingly dragged me into a nightmare from which I cannot escape. Lobo was once a stray wandering the streets of Mexico City. I found him one rainy night outside a convenience store, soaked and skin and bones thin, no collar, no identification chip. I had no intention of adopting a dog. My small apartment had no yard, and my job at the clothing store often brought me home late. But Lobo's brown eyes won me over, and I brought him home. We quickly adapted to each other. Lobo wasn't loud like other dogs in the building. He never damaged furniture. The only thing he demanded was a walk every evening after I returned from work. This became our sacred time, a stroll around the neighborhood for Lobo to do his business and for me to decompress after a long day. I enjoyed those evenings when Mexico City began to settle into sleep. The streets were less crowded, the air cooler, and there was a strange peace in the usually chaotic urban space. Lobo and I had our familiar route down the stairs from my fifth-floor apartment right onto Insurgentes Avenue, 4 blocks to the small park, then back via a different road. Everything followed a ritual, safe and predictable, until that night. It was November, when nights in Mexico City grow colder and fog often blankets the streets at dawn. I worked at the Zara store in the Santa Fe Mall, where we were preparing for the El Buen Fin sale, Mexico's version of Black Friday. That meant late nights inventory checks and arranging displays. That night I arrived home at 1:30 a.m. exhausted and just wanting to collapse into bed. But when I opened the door, Lobo greeted me with unusual excitement, tail wagging, vigorously spinning in circles, and his mouth holding his leash, as if to remind me of the walk we hadn't yet taken. I know, I sighed. Today's especially tiring. How about we just go out for a quick minute? But Lobo wouldn't compromise. He looked at me with pleading eyes I couldn't resist. I had considered just taking him down to the building's courtyard, but then felt guilty. Lobo had waited for me all day, patient and alone. He deserved a proper walk. "All right," I said, "but just around the block." I didn't even have time to put down my backpack. I took the leash from Lobo's mouth, clipped it to his collar, and we headed down the stairs. Outside, the air was bone-chillingly cold. A thin mist covered the streets, blurring the light from the street lamps. My Condesa neighborhood, usually vibrant with restaurants and bars, was now as quiet as a cemetery. Lobo led me along our familiar route, stopping to mark his territory at every corner, nose pressed to the ground, to read the invisible messages other dogs had left. I let my mind wander, enjoying this rare moment of quiet in the day. Passing the park, I was about to turn home via our usual road, but Lobo had other ideas. He pulled hard on the leash, wanting to go further. "No, Lobo," I said, trying to pull him back. "It's late. We need to go home." But Lobo was insistent. He pulled harder, nearly yanking the leash from my hand. I'd never seen him like this. Lobo was a well-behaved dog, always obedient. This resistance was unusual. "Fine," I said. "One more block, then we must return." Lobo led me to turn left onto a smaller street. We rarely visited Calle Las Flores, a quiet road with low buildings packed closely together. Most windows were dark, with just a few lights flickering from upper-floor apartments. The silence was so complete I could hear Lobo's nails gently tapping on the sidewalk. And then when we were halfway down the street, everything changed. It was a simple sound, almost mundane knocking. Not gentle door knocking, but violent, furious banging. Metal hitting wood, repeated, persistent, as if someone was trying to break a door from the inside. The sound came from a house on our right, a one-story building with a faded blue gate. Paint-peeling metal parts, rusted, and old graffiti covering the surface. The gate was shaking as if someone inside was pushing and pulling it with all their strength. Lobo froze the fur along his spine, standing straight up. A low growl emanated from his throat, and I felt his body tense. He stared at the shaking gate tail, rigid ears erect. Just as I was about to pull Lobo away from the house, another sound erupted, a woman's cry for help. Not an ordinary scream, but a heart-wrenching, desperate wail that made me shudder. Her voice was hoarse, as if she'd screamed herself raw. "Help me, please, I can't open the door." The knocking ceased, but then resumed with even greater intensity. The gate shook violently, hinges squealing as if crying for help themselves. "Is anyone there? Please help me." The voice called again, weaker, as if the woman was losing strength. I stood there motionless, my heart racing wildly. Lobo barked furiously, trying to break free from my grip, but I held the leash tight. He looked at the vibrating gate tail, straight body, rigid with tension. My instinct told me to run away, but how could I abandon someone clearly in distress? I looked around, hoping someone else had heard the cries for help. It was then I noticed several faces watching from windows of neighboring houses. They had heard, but no one was moving to help. An elderly man cracked open a second-floor window and looked down. His face was just a blurred shadow, but I could feel his eyes fixed on me. "No one lives there," he said, his voice deep and hollow. "Go away, young man." I looked back at the shaking gate. "But someone's calling for help. Don't you hear it?" The man didn't answer. He simply closed his window, disappearing into darkness. Other neighbors did likewise, pulling curtains, turning off lights as if they wanted nothing to do with whatever was happening. The cry for help sounded again, this time fainter. "Please, I can't open." Lobo barked maniacally, trying to escape my grip. I'd never seen him so agitated. He wasn't merely frightened. He was trying to tell me something. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed emergency services. After several rings, a monotone voice answered. 911. How can I help? There's someone trapped in a house," I said, voice shaking. "She can't open the door. She's calling for help." "What's the address, sir?" I looked around, trying to find a house number. "Calle Las Flores. I think it's number 27. A blue gate." "Do you see signs of forced entry? Is anyone trying to harm the woman?" "No. I don't know. She seems trapped inside. The gate is shaking like she's trying to open it." "Please wait there. We'll send a patrol unit." I hung up looking back at the gate. The banging had stopped, but now there was another sound, scratching as if someone was trying to dig under the gate. I didn't know what to do. Should I approach closer? Should I call out to her? Should I try to open the gate myself? Before I could decide, Lobo suddenly stopped barking. He stood motionless, ears perked up, eyes fixed on a spot beneath the gate. And then I saw it, something moving from inside to outside, sliding across the ground. I bent down for a closer look. In the dim streetlight I saw it was a key, an old metal key with a small red paint mark on the head. "Take it." The faint voice came from inside. "Open the door." My heart pounded. Why couldn't she open the door herself? If she had a key, why push it outside? Lobo started growling again, even more intensely than before. He didn't want me near that key. Fortunately, I heard police sirens in the distance. Just minutes later, a patrol car stopped in front of the house. 2 officers stepped out, a middle-aged, heavy-set man and a younger woman. They approached me, hands resting on their holstered weapons. "Are you the caller?" the man asked. I nodded, still gripping Lobo's leash tightly. "Yes, there's someone inside trying to get out. They pushed a key under the gate." I pointed to the key still lying on the ground. The female officer moved closer, shining her flashlight on the key. "We've received reports of strange noises from this house before," she said. "But each time we came, there was no one here." The man looked at me skeptically. "Are you sure you heard someone? Could it have been the wind? Or maybe a stray animal?" Just then the gate began to shake again, more violently than before. The cry for help returned, pain-filled and desperate. "Please, I can't get out." Both officers jumped, hands moving to their weapons. They looked at each other, then back at the shaking gate. "We'll check it out," the man said, his tone now serious. "Please step back." The female officer bent down to pick up the key. She held it for a moment, examining it, then handed it to her colleague. The man also hesitated, as if reluctant to touch it. Finally, he took the key and approached the gate. Lobo pulled me backward, as if not wanting us to be too close when the gate opened. The officer inserted the key into the lock, turning it slowly, listening to the metal sliding inside the mechanism. There was a small click, and he pushed the gate. It opened with a long, eerie creak. Inside was darkness. The female officer turned on her flashlight, shining it inward. In the pale light I could see a small yard filled with garbage, and beyond that, a dark house with boarded-up windows. "Is anyone there?" the man called out loudly. No answer. The cries for help had stopped. Only a heavy silence hung in the air. The 2 officers exchanged glances, then stepped inside, flashlights drawn. I remained outside with Lobo, trying to peer through the gap in the gate. I could hear their footsteps on the tiled ground, then their voices calling out. "There's no one here," the man shouted. "The house is abandoned." "But I heard—" I began, but the female officer cut me off. "You should come see," she said, her voice strange. "There's something you should see." I didn't want to enter. Every fiber of my being told me I should turn and run. But curiosity won. I tied Lobo's leash to a nearby lamppost, comforted him with a few soft words, then stepped through the gate. The air inside was heavy, thick with the smell of mold, and another disturbing odor like old leather or dried meat. The small yard was full of trash and dead leaves, seemingly untouched for years. The main house at the back of the yard was a 1-story structure with a red-tiled roof, cracked and broken, and lime-washed walls peeling away. The 2 officers stood inside, pointing their flashlights at a corner of the house. I approached, heart pounding. "Look at this," the man said, his voice lowered. I followed the direction of the flashlight beam and felt frozen in place. Attached to the inside of the gate that had been shaking and emitting cries for help, was a human corpse. Not a fresh corpse, but a withered, desiccated body like a natural mummy. Skin stretched over bone, dark brown, like tanned leather, cracked and wrinkled. 2 long, thin arms were tied to the crossbar of the gate with ropes that had cut into the bone. The body was fixed to the inside of the gate, with other ropes wrapped around the chest and legs. But what terrified me most was the posture. the arms stretched forward as if reaching for freedom. The head thrown back, mouth open in a silent scream, and the eyes, dried-out eyes in deep sockets, seemed to stare directly at me. I couldn't breathe. The world spun around me, and I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. "How long has it been here?" I mumbled. "Many years," the female officer replied. "At least a decade from what I can tell." I looked more closely, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Why would someone tie a body to the inside of a gate? And how could I have heard cries for help if the woman had been dead for years? Just then, Lobo began barking frantically from outside. His barking was different, high-pitched and fearful. "I need to check on my dog," I said, turning away from the horrific sight. When I reached the gate, Lobo was struggling violently, trying to break free from his leash. He stared straight at me, and in the dim light I could see the fear in his eyes. I untied the leash and embraced him, feeling his body trembling. Something was very wrong here, and Lobo sensed it. The police officer had called for backup, and soon the area was cordoned off with police tape. An ambulance arrived, though there was nothing to treat. A forensics van also appeared. I was questioned for hours about what I was doing there, how I had heard the cries for help, and why I was walking so late. I told them everything, but I could see they didn't fully believe me. How could I have heard a voice from someone dead for so long? Perhaps it was an auditory hallucination, an investigator suggested. Wind blowing through the door cracks combined with fatigue and imagination, but I knew what I had heard. And the two first officers had heard it too. They couldn't deny that. According to what the investigators could determine, the body was that of a woman approximately 30 years old. She had been dead at least 15 years, difficult to pinpoint exactly, due to the desiccated condition of the body. There were no signs of violence except for a small wound in the chest, possibly from a knife or sharp object. The house had been abandoned since the 1990s, and no one knew who the last owner was. Elderly neighbors recounted that they occasionally heard noises from the house at night, but they had grown accustomed to ignoring them. "The sounds always come in the dead of night," one old woman related. "Knocking cries for help. We called the police many times over the years, but they never found anything. After a while, we learned to live with it. I couldn't understand how people could ignore such desperate cries for help, whether real or supernatural. But that's how people cope with the unexplainable. They build an invisible wall and live as if it doesn't exist." The story appeared in newspapers. Mummified corpse found hanging in abandoned house, but was quickly forgotten in the whirlwind of other news. No one recognized the body. No one came forward to identify it. She was just one of many forgotten souls in this massive city. I tried to return to normal life, but couldn't. The image of the corpse on the gate haunted my dreams. I would wake in the middle of the night thinking I heard knocking from a distance. Even Lobo changed. He became more alert, reacting to sounds I couldn't hear. I began researching the house and neighborhood. Through conversations with longtime residents, I discovered a disturbing story. The house had once belonged to a young woman named Mariana, an artist who lived alone. In the late 1980s, she suddenly disappeared. Neighbors assumed she had moved away, but no one saw her leave. "She was a quiet girl, always painting strange pictures," an old man recounted. "One day she just wasn't there anymore. The house remained locked, and gradually people forgot she existed." But there was another detail, one they reluctantly shared. A few months before her disappearance, Mariana had met a man, an art collector, who claimed to be impressed by her talent. He visited frequently, and after each visit, neighbors noticed Mariana growing paler and weaker. There were rumors that he wasn't an art collector, the old man whispered, that he belonged to a cult, a group that believed in ancient rituals. I didn't know if this story was connected to the corpse on the gate, but it added another layer of mystery surrounding the house. And then there was something else, a detail I only stumbled upon through an old newspaper article. According to ancient Aztec legend, there was a ritual called the gatekeeper, where a sacrifice victim was tied to the door of a temple symbolizing the connection between the world of the living and the dead. The victim's soul was said to guard the gateway, preventing malevolent spirits from passing through. Had Mariana been the victim of a similar ritual? Was her soul trying to escape, or was it trying to prevent something else from escaping? And then 2 weeks after the incident, I woke at 3 a.m. to a familiar sound knocking, but this time it wasn't from a distance. It came from my bedroom door. Lobo heard it too. He stood up, fur bristling, growling toward the door. The knocking grew louder, as if someone was trying to break through from the outside. I froze in place, unable to move. My apartment was locked securely. There was no way anyone could have entered. I lived alone, no roommates or family members. The knocking stopped, replaced by gentle scratching beneath the door, as if someone or something was trying to crawl in through the gap under the door. And then I saw it. A small, thin object moving into the room from under the door, sliding across the floor. A key, with a small red paint mark on the head, identical to the key from the abandoned house. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move, couldn't think. Only pure primal fear filled my body. Lobo jumped off the bed, growling at the key, but not daring to approach it. The knocking at the door resumed, but fainter, as if the knocker was losing strength. And then a voice whispered through the crack, a woman's voice, the same voice I'd heard at the abandoned house. "Open the door! Please, I need to come in!" My nursing instincts took over. I clutched the blanket, trying to control my breathing. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. "Who's there?" I finally asked, voice trembling. "Mariana." The voice replied, almost inaudible. "I need to come in. I can't stay out here forever." The name Mariana, the name I only knew from stories told by local residents, the name I had never mentioned to anyone. How could a prank or hallucination know that? "Why are you here?" I asked, throat dry. "What do you want from me?" "You freed me," the voice answered. "You opened the gate." "I didn't open it," I protested. "The police did." "But you called them. You found me. After all these years." The knocking grew more urgent and the voice became more pressing. "You don't understand. I wasn't the only one freed when the gate opened. It followed you home." "What followed me?" I asked, voice breaking. "The thing I guarded all these years. The thing I sacrificed myself to contain. The collector, his ritual." Suddenly, Lobo jumped up and began barking at a dark corner of the room, a corner I'd never paid much attention to before. I looked in that direction and felt my blood freeze in my veins. In the corner, where the light from the window couldn't reach, was a dark shape moving. Not human movement, but something unnatural, distorted. It had no definite form, just a region of darkness, denser than the surrounding shadows, twisting and expanding as if breathing. And it was growing larger. "It followed you home," the voice outside the door whispered. "It always needs a new host, a new gatekeeper." I looked back at the key on the floor. By instinct, I knew it was the key to invisible shackles waiting for me. If I picked it up, if I opened the door, I would become the next one tied to some gate, perhaps the gate of my own apartment, or another gate somewhere in this vast city. "I can hear it growing," Mariana's voice said, sounding strange and distant. "There isn't much time." I looked back at the corner. The darkness had now consumed nearly a quarter of the space, spreading like spilled oil. I could feel its presence, a weight on the air, a pressure on my mind. It wanted me to be afraid. It fed on fear. "I'm not afraid," I said, though I wasn't sure if that was true. I put the key into the lock, turning it gently. There was a small click, and I opened the door. Outside wasn't the hallway of my apartment building. Instead, I found myself looking into the inner courtyard of the abandoned house, the same house I had visited with Lobo. And standing before me was a young woman, pale but beautiful, with eyes full of ancient secrets. "Mariana," I whispered. She nodded. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this, but I couldn't continue alone anymore. What must I do?" "Take my hand and don't look back." I reached toward her, feeling her fingers cold but solid grasp mine. At the same moment, I felt another weight on my back, the darkness trying to pull me back. "Don't look back," Mariana reminded, her voice urgent. We stepped through the threshold into the courtyard of the house. I could feel the darkness still clinging, trying to keep me in the world of the living. But Mariana's pull was stronger, more determined. As we crossed the yard, I saw the blue gate, no corpse attached to it now. Instead, two metal shackles waited fastened to the crossbar of the gate. "I was here for 15 years, Mariana said. "Now it's our turn together." "For how long?" I asked. "Until someone else opens the gate." I nodded, accepting my new fate. As Mariana led me to the gate, I felt the darkness writhing, trying to escape. But the closer we got to the gate, the weaker its hold became. Finally, I stood facing the shackle, and Mariana handed me the key with the red paint mark. "You must do this yourself," she said. "It must be a free choice." I looked at the shackle, then back at Mariana. There was sadness in her eyes, but also peace, the peace of someone who has fought a long battle and knows that finally they won't have to fight alone anymore. I inserted the key into the shackle's lock and turned it. The next morning, pedestrians on Calle Las Flores were surprised to see a black dog standing outside the blue gate of the abandoned house. It barked incessantly, scratching at the gate as if wanting to enter. When police arrived, the same officers who had come the night before, they found the gate locked again, though they were certain they had left it open. And when they used a crowbar to force it open, they witnessed a sight that froze their blood. Attached to the inside of the gate were not one, but two bodies. One withered by time and one fresh, with skin still warm. Their arms were intertwined, and on their lips was a strange smile, as if they shared a secret no one else could understand. The black dog Lobo was taken to an animal shelter where he was quickly adopted by a family. But people say that every night Lobo escapes from his new home and returns to the house with the blue gate sitting outside barking into the darkness. And occasionally, if you pass by Calle Las Flores at midnight, you might hear gentle knocking and a whispered voice from inside. "Please open the door. I just want to go home." According to Aztec legend, the gatekeeper souls, bound to guard the boundary between life and death, will seek replacements whenever they get the chance. They will knock, they will plead, they will push a key under your door. And if you are curious enough, frightened enough, or lonely enough to open that door, the only advice I can give: never go out after midnight. And if you hear knocking, never ever open the door. Many cultures have stories of souls trapped by violent death. Have you ever heard strange knocking in the dead of night? Have you ever felt something watching you from the shadows? Share your experience in the comments below.